World War Bitcoin has now begun.
Every country is not going to be adding Bitcoin to their reserve status to compete in the global hash war in the 21st century. That's World War Bitcoin. You have to have Bitcoin. It's a mad scramble to get more Bitcoin because the fiat money world is collapsing.
Bitcoin hash rate just hit an all-time high of 800 exahash. Let me just put that into perspective. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon's cloud services combined makes up less than 1% of Bitcoin's hash rate. And that's because the global race is on to own a piece of the world's most valuable network. China, Russia, Kazakhstan, and other countries in the Middle East are closing in on the United States, as more and more nation states are using government resources to mine Bitcoin. And that's because you can't play the same game that those countries can, when they have more natural resources or they can just print money out of thin air.
The end game is to acquire more Bitcoin. Whoever gets the most Bitcoin wins.
Today, we're going to look at how companies, nations, and governments are competing for precious commodities in cyberspace. We call it the Bitcoin hash wars. Stay tuned for the entire episode to find out who we think is going to win this global hash war. I have my guesses. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Let's go.
The most important thing to understand about Bitcoin is a bank in cyberspace.
So if you want to win World War Bitcoin, you need to start accumulating and hoarding and buying and stacking Bitcoin aggressively as soon as possible.
One major shift that's happening in the digital transformation of the world is that nations are competing less and less in physical space and more for cyberspace. Take Bhutan, for example. This tiny nation with just a GDP of $3 billion is one of the 4 largest sovereign nations when it comes to their Bitcoin holdings. They own over $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. And it's done using the natural resources they already have. It's a new arena. And that's why nations like Oman are moving from an oil standard to a Bitcoin standard. They plan to acquire 7% of the global hash rate in 2025. Not sure that'll happen, but we'll see. Economically obscure and irrelevant countries like Ethiopia now own 2.25% of the global hash rate of Bitcoin's network. And a lot of other countries are moving towards trusting a network versus a nation because of what the United States has done to ruin their trust with other nations globally.
Sovereign nations today are very interested in mining Bitcoin. Why? The US weaponized the US dollar. And so if you as a sovereign want to hold your reserve assets, you don't have many options. The US dollar historically has been the reserve currency of the world because it's a safe haven and you could trust the US to not mess with your dollars. That's not the case anymore. If you're a commodity producer in the Middle East, for example, there's risk that the US may put you on an OFAC list. And then what do? Now you can't move money.
And this is why the global hash wars have begun. And it's not just countries and nations, companies are joining the race. Companies like a Chinese auto manufacturer named Kango now own 933 Bitcoin, up 56% in just the past month. And other companies like BitFuFu, I can't believe I just said that out loud, signed contracts with Bitmain for 80,000 S-series miners. Insane. Bitfarms increased their hash rate by 97% in 2024. Hive increased their production by 47%. And massive players like Marathon now hold 45,000 Bitcoin valued at $4.2 billion as they execute their never sell strategy. And the biggest driver to stack and acquire more Bitcoin is that because there's approximately only 5% of Bitcoin left still to be mined. There will only be 21 million. This is a winner-take-all market.
Whoever gets the most Bitcoin wins.
Before we get to who we think is going to be the winner globally, let's get to our first 2 sponsors. Bitcoin miners historically sold their Bitcoin back to the market to fund their operations, but now they're borrowing to fund their operations and not selling their Bitcoin because you hodl Bitcoin. You don't sell it, which is the premise behind Ledn. Since 2018, they've been the global leader in allowing people to unlock liquidity without selling their Bitcoin. They've issued $6.5 billion worth of loans to tens of thousands of clients. And I personally have used the product myself. The loan process took about 2 minutes and my account was funded in less than 24 hours. No monthly payments, repay anytime, and I can have confidence because I know that they're not lending out my Bitcoin. Go to ledn.io/borrowing to unlock liquidity in your Bitcoin stack without selling it. That's ledn.io/borrowing. You don't own Bitcoin and someone else is controlling it, whether you're a mining company or an individual. And that's why the Bitcoin Way exists, to help you take ownership of your generational wealth. Members of their team will walk you through 100% self-custody step by step so you can remove all counterparty risk, stop sharing keys with third parties, and ensure you protect your generational wealth the right way. Head over to thebitcoinway.com and schedule a free 30-minute consultation with their team.
Bitcoin is of national security concern for this country. Russia is the world's second largest Bitcoin mining nation. Countries that operate on a Bitcoin standard from a perspective of transacting and holding Bitcoin can transact outside of the sanctions environment. They can transact outside of government controls. If the US does not have a substantial amount of Bitcoin mining onshore, they can be locked out. And US companies can be locked out of transacting their Bitcoin. So strategic ownership of block space is of a national security concern. And that's why with 40% of global Bitcoin mining in the US must maintain dominance, not just in Bitcoin mining, but also in the holding of Bitcoin assets in US companies, whether they're ETFs, whether they're Bitcoin mining companies, whether it's MicroStrategy. But the US must maintain dominance because by the same reason the US holds 40% of the gold reserves in the world, they can exert influence in financial markets. They have to do that as the world transitions to digital currencies.
I now believe that the United States sees Bitcoin as a strategic asset in more ways than one. And I believe it's because the president has someone like Michael Saylor in his ear. Here's what I imagine that Michael Saylor is telling the president.
Once upon a time, the Dutch paid 60 guilders for Manhattan. They generated a multi-trillion-dollar payoff. Once upon a time, we bought the Louisiana Territory for $15 million. It's like a third of the country. It's worth trillions. We bought California from the Mexicans. Under duress, I'll note, but we still paid them. They didn't want to sell because they were smart. You shouldn't have sold California. But nonetheless, we paid $18 million. We had a chance to do the deal. By the way, I don't want to sell you my Bitcoin either. We paid them $18 million. We got California, Nevada, Vegas. It's worth quite a lot, $8 trillion. And then we bought Alaska from the Russians. We paid them a few million. It's worth trillions. Okay, it's been done before. It's a very simple idea. Figure out where the value is going to be. Go buy it cheap and hold it. You're a nation. That's what nations do. Bitcoin is manifest destiny for the United States.
It's good to speculate on what might happen in the future, but let's look at where the global hash rate stands today. The United States is the leader with about 37% of the global hash rate. Despite the government banning Bitcoin in 2021, China is still in second place with about 20 to 21% of the global hash rate. Kazakhstan accounts for about 13% of the global hash rate. They have substantial energy reserves and low energy costs. The global hash rate competition for positions 4 and 5 are debatable between Russia and Canada because Russia is likely in the top 3, but underreports how much Bitcoin mining actually happens in their region. They have a cold climate and are one of the world's most abundant natural energy producers. I say they're between 5% and 15%. You just don't know. Canada makes up about 6% of the global hash rate. It has abundant renewable energy sources. I think these positions will be relatively the same in 2025, except I believe that Canada gets kicked out. I believe that we will see a major country in the Middle East take Canada's position as the number 5 leader in global hash rate. It's not that Canada doesn't have the resources. It doesn't seem like they have the sense or the fortitude to invest in Bitcoin strategically, which is a blunder on their part. Who do you think will be the top 5 in the global hash wars in 2025? One final thought. Bitcoin's price has typically been highly correlated with the hash rate. And with hash rate reaching all-time highs, do you think that this correlation will continue and that we'll have a new all-time high in Bitcoin in Q1 of 2025? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And I would love to connect with you in real life, down at the BitBlockBoom conference from April 3rd through April 6th. BitBlockBoom is the longest running Bitcoin conference in the United States at over 8 years old, and it attracts speakers and some of the greatest minds in Bitcoin from all over the world, like Parker Lewis, Marty Bent, Guy Swan, Bob Burnett, Gary Leland, and me. Learn about Bitcoin mining, buying your first Bitcoin, taking self-custody of your Bitcoin, as well as having exclusive access to your favorite people in Bitcoin at exclusive parties like the Saturday Casino Night. Your ticket is all-inclusive, and you can get $100 off by going to bitblockboom.com and entering the promo code BBB25. That's bitblockboom.com and enter the promo code BBB25. I hope to meet some of you all there. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, do so. We put out fire content here 6 days a week. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Happy stacking.